Hello, friends and people. I hope this finds you well. Apologies for taking 11 months to come out with a second episode. It's mostly because I'm incredibly lazy. It also has to do with the fact that I'm still pretty worried about being pigeonholed as a crazy conspiracy theorist for my wrong thoughts. Now, let's begin by considering where all of our worldviews kind of coincide. Now, for me, big picture, simple pitch, the rich people are using their power to build the future of our society in such a way where they maintain their power and they maintain the wealth gap. Okay? I don't think that they want a future where we're all just living on equal footing. A future where we all kind of live in peace and harmony and at the same level. I think that history shows they like being on top. They like thinking of themselves as above you and all of us. Now, as of 2016, the blue team thinks that Putin and Russia and, all of the criminal organizations over there have used their power, their influence to control public discourse in America and other countries in order to enrich themselves in certain ways so that they can build their empire. The red team seems to think that maybe it's China, that's the bad guys, or maybe it's just the liberals who, they're using their influence over media companies and educational institutions to influence public discourse in order to enrich themselves in certain ways and build their own little empire. So really, we all kind of agree that in this world, there are small groups of people who are trying to use their power to influence what we do, what we think, and how society gets built in order to enrich themselves. Now, it seems like the only place where we disagree is who is a part of these groups and who is being manipulated. Coincidentally, I don't see a lot of people who are looking at themselves in the mirror, looking at themselves as the possible dupes. No. It's always the other guys. Oh, it's the other team that's stupid and crazy and dumb. They're being manipulated. Not me. No. My leaders, they're fighting for good. Yes, they tell me things that I like. So it couldn't be them. And if you're saying that it is my team that's bad, then that makes you bad. And this is the mindset that I see. And of course, if everybody's thinking that way, then general discourse just sort of breaks down, doesn't it? Because if every single interaction with someone from the opposite team is just an argument where you're trying to win, then you're never going to be able to see yourselves and your own faults in an objective way, because your focus is going to be about proving the other team wrong. And if that's your focus, then you're not going to cede any ground to them. You're not going to say, oh, yeah, you know what? Maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe I'm incorrect about that thing that I care about, because that would be seen as losing. And again, if that's your mindset, we can't have any functional discourse. And I think it's becoming clear that we don't. Everyone's just kind of doing their own thing, fighting for their team and trying to get their people into power so they can force everyone to do what they want. And if you don't like it, well, then the only solution is to get your team into power so that they can force their will on everyone. This is not a recipe for a stable society. Clearly, it is not. Now, my views, I don't think are that radical or crazy. In fact, I think it's pretty goddamn logical. Like, really, what we're talking about is just the culmination of business as usual. And if you think about what's the main principle of business, make money. How do you make more money? Always more. Never, oh, we did so good, let's slow down. Right? There's never a time when Jamie Dimon goes to the Chase board and says, you know what? We did so well last quarter. We made so much money that we're just going to take a step back and let other people share in the profit. It is always more. And this is a difficult conversation to have, because it's like, well, at some level, at a basic level, that's perfectly healthy and natural. If you're a mom and pop shop or a startup, you do want to figure out ways to maximize your profit. That's fine. Okay, but there comes a point when you've maximized profit for 40 years and now you're a multinational corporation who is just swallowing up all of the competition and hollowing out the worker base, sending it over to cheap markets in poor countries so that you can undercut everyone else's business. You get to a point where you are already so far ahead of everyone that you just continue to build leverage to the point where nobody really can catch you. Now, we try to make laws to prevent against monopoly, to prevent against a single company having total domination of a market. And we recognize that, that is possible for one company to dominate so much that literally people do not have a choice. They provide a good or a service that is so vital that they have to buy it. But because there's nobody else to go to, these companies can just charge through the roof whatever they want for life-saving medication or what have you. So we've made laws to try to protect against this, because that's not good for society in general, for one person to dominate. But what we have now are 3, 4, maybe 5 companies that are running things. They effectively have a monopoly, except they're not a single company. They just act as a cartel who, they don't really spend their time fighting each other because it's more efficient to uh, to amicably work together so that they can swallow up all of the rest of the competition. And so, like, what does that lead to? Does that lead to a healthy economy, a happy society? No, it leads to a few people making the decisions for the rest of us. And those decisions are, of course, only meant to enrich the few at the expense of the many. This is why I think it's best to start off with talking about the banking system. The understanding the fundamental mechanisms of money creation is crucial to understand if you're going to understand that our society is one big fucking scam that's designed to drain all of the wealth and power upwards towards the 0.1%. So we begin by looking at the Federal Reserve, the United States Central Bank. And this is coming straight from their website. First point to understand, the Federal Reserve banks are not a part of the federal government. Interesting. The Federal Reserve banks are set up like private corporations. Member banks hold stock in the Federal Reserve banks and earn dividends. The Fed is directly owned by the private banks. Now, the Fed is made up of three parts or sections. The first part being the regional banks that actually distribute the cash to the commercial banks. Again, owned by the private banks. The second part is the Board of Governors, which is voted on by the member banks. Okay? And then the Federal Open Market Committee. Now, there is a bit of a shuck and jive here because proponents of this insane system will say that the Open Market Committee is how the people exert their will upon monetary policy. So no, it's not just the private banks that run things, it's the people. Well, it would actually be the senators and the Congress people who the bank answer to. Of course, I use quotes because the Congress people only have jobs because they're being paid millions of dollars directly by banks and other corporations. So do they work for the banks or do the banks work for them? Kind of confused on that point. The FOMC, a majority of the voting spots are again determined by the private banks. Point number 2, and really kind of the most important point to understand, is how money is actually created. This is a educational document published by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York in conjunction with the Department of Education. And it puts it pretty clearly. Commercial banks create checkbook money, cash, whenever they grant a loan, simply by adding new deposit dollars to accounts on their books in exchange for a borrower's IOU. An IOU would be any type of loan document, such as a mortgage. So think about this. When you go to buy a house, what happens is the bank buys the house with money that it just invents. Okay? Then you work for 40 years to pay off that loan. That's how that money is created. So the bank is always in a win-win scenario. If you succeed in paying off your loan, plus the interest, of course, then great. They made all of that money for doing literally nothing. They did no work. They created no value. Just by the wave of a pen. And that's what fiat currency means. Fiat means because I said so, it exists. Or you fail to pay off that loan through some kind of financial calamity. Somehow you're not able to pay them back, and they take the house and all of your shit that they deem valuable. Okay? And that property is always going to retain some kind of intrinsic value. So even if they have to sell it for pennies on the dollar, they're still coming out on top. They're still making more money than they had when they started. What do you think that does over a century? Do you think that adds to the wealth gap? Do you think that essentially ensures that the rich will always be rich and it will always be difficult to move from low on the socioeconomic ladder? Because if these banks are always in a good position to be profitable, then also all of the companies that they support and that they want to be successful will have a high chance of being successful in the long term. Greenspan puts it pretty nicely, just right out in the open.
What should be the proper relationship between a chairman of the Fed and a president of the United States?
Well, first of all, the Federal Reserve is an independent agency, and that means basically that there is no other agency of government which can overrule actions that we take.
No other agency of government that can overrule actions that we take. That sounds good. That sounds good for us. Yeah. This is a measurement of the price of goods for like 130 years. Price is relatively stable. The Fed's created to, of course, maintain the value of the dollar. And well, they immediately create the Great Depression. And then, whoop, see ya. Whoop, everything is more expensive. And this is just up till 2000. Do you think that everything has gotten less expensive from there? Or do you think it has gone up and up forever? And of course, this makes sense because if the Fed is just printing up trillions of dollars, what's that going to do to your money? It's going to devalue it, because now the money that you're making is a smaller percentage of the whole. Okay? And you're essentially making the same amount of money every year. I mean, obviously some people are getting raises, but that's not even equal to the amount that the currency is being devalued. So you're actually making less money while your savings is also shrinking, because again, it's a smaller percentage of the whole, while everything that you need to live becomes more expensive. So everything's more expensive, you're making less money. Does that mean that you lose money overall? Does that mean that your time becomes less valuable? Yikes. I think it does. And yeah, going back to that claim of the Fed causing the Great Depression, yeah, I mean, directly admitted to. This is a speech by Ben Bernanke to addressing Milton Friedman on his birthday. Let me end my talk by abusing slightly my status as an official representative of the Federal Reserve. I would like to say to Milton and Anne, regarding the Great Depression, you're right. We did it. We're very sorry, but thanks to you, we won't do it again. Oh, that's so nice. That's so sincere. Now, we get to the HSBC case, which I consider to be the most illuminating case of fraud in the last 20 years. This was back in 2012 when HSBC and a few other banks were caught laundering hundreds of millions of dollars for the Sinaloa drug cartel, Colombia's most dangerous drug cartel, as well as Iranian and Libyan terrorists. Iran, Libya, Sudan, Burma, Cuba. Nice. Hundreds of millions, billions of dollars. Now, they ended up having to pay a fee of 1.9 billion. I say fee because they were actually able to determine what they would pay. This was not a fine. Fines are enforced. Fines are imposed. Fees are negotiated. Now, the awesome part is that nobody was indicted. Nobody went to jail at all. According to DOJ Criminal Chief Laney Brewer, the reason was here. In trying to reach a result that's fair and just and powerful, you also have to look at the collateral consequences. Now, that is interesting because collateral consequences is also a court precedent that was used in 2008 to get some of those bankers off who, as you might remember, created a worldwide crisis through years and years of fraud and sketchy, manipulative behavior. Now, again, the reason why I consider this to be the most illuminating case is because the DOJ actually wanted to prosecute them. Okay, they were very strongly considering a prosecution. However, the UK Financial Services Agency, their Treasury Secretary essentially found out that the DOJ was about to indict this British behemoth bank and decided to step in. So Chancellor Osborne, George Osborne, sent a letter to Bernanke and Tim Geithner, who was our Treasury Secretary at the time, warning them of possible financial calamity if they indeed went through with enforcing the law. Okay, this is a report compiled by the House Committee on Financial Services. Okay, 3 years it took them to gather all of this information, and you see this letter from Osborne states, potential financial stability risks of enforcement, of enforcing the law. For a systemically important financial institution, this could lead to contagion. And, this sounds like a threat, right? It's a threat. It's saying if you prosecute crimes that our banks committed, then the economy of the world is going to fucking explode. And he repeats the threat 3 times. Unintended consequences, stability risks, serious implications for financial and economic stability. Okay. Next steps, he says, to a sovereign nation. It is for you and your partners in other departments and agencies to decide how best to supervise, regulate, and enforce compliance within your jurisdiction. He didn't say within the U.S., which would have been simpler to write and less ambiguous. He said within your jurisdiction. The implication being that American soil, American laws being broken is not entirely our jurisdiction. Okay? He goes on to say, and Adair Turner, Mervyn King, and I are together committed to ensuring that UK financial institutions are fully compliant with global standards and rules. So he's not even referencing British law. He's referencing global standards and rules. What standards and rules is he talking about? Well, the giveaway is right here, where he refers to the bank as systemically important. Right? Now, the only global financial entity to use such labeling is the Financial Stability Board, a arm of the Bank for International Settlements based in Basel, Switzerland. Now, they keep a list of all of the banks, again, that are systemically important. That is, that they are so big that even the threat of prosecuting them is enough to destroy the world economy. Now, George Osborne is was a part of the FSA in London, and simultaneously sits on this multinational regulatory agency. okay, at the same time. So how does this work? Okay. This is the FSB's charter. Okay. What they see as their job. Okay. To assess vulnerabilities affecting the global financial system and identify and review the regulatory, supervisory, and related actions needed to address them and their outcomes. So their job is to observe other countries and what they're doing to the banks that are part of their cartel, let's call it, because that's what it is. So this is the job that they are enforcing. Now, again, global standards and rules. What rules exactly? Why couldn't we prosecute criminal banks, criminal activity by criminal banks? Well, if we look at this, this is an agreement between the Swiss government and the Bank for International Settlements, where it outlines their privileges and their immunities that they've granted this fucking institution. Okay. Documentary immunity. All documents and any data, media belonging to the bank or in its possession shall be inviolable at all times and in all places. There's an interesting piece of this whole investigation where the Treasury Office of Financial Assets Control, which is like an investigative agency within the Treasury, they were simultaneously investigating HSBC and supposed to be recommending a part of the fine structure with the DOJ. However, the lawyers for HSBC, only gave the Treasury a small portion of the transactions that were allegedly illegal. And that's not illegal to do. They are allowed to determine which transactions were able to be investigated in the first place. So it was something like 700 out of the 1,100 total transactions were not even able to be investigated. Furthermore, the DOJ ended up revising their agreements because of these laws here, of these rules, as well as the threat conveyed by Osborne about, financial calamity. So, another immunity, the bank shall enjoy in respect of its property and assets wherever located and by whomsoever held, immunity from any measure of execution. Even when the DOJ downgraded their prosecution from indictment to just a deferred prosecution agreement, there were still concessions made. So the first DPA given by Attorney General Eric Holder was supposed to be kind of take it or leave it, no nonsense deal where company Bonus structures were changed, as well as executives responsible for these illegal transactions were fired and then able to be prosecuted after they were fired, because then that would allow the bank to remain viable and avoid any of these calamities that would have come apparently from prosecuting the bank. However, because Osborne reminded the U.S. federal government that they actually need to follow global rules, they downgraded it again into, a DPA that was essentially just a light fine and sort of weak compliance standards that merely could void the senior executive bonuses. The final DPA contained new language that insulated the HSBC employees from prosecution. So even after they were fired, they couldn't go after them. This is illuminating because it's showing that these amorphous global entities that we have no say in how they are structured, how they are put together, actually have the power to supersede American sovereign law. Okay, so when the crazy conspiracy theorists talk about global criminal organizations, controlling the government, this is actually what we mean, or it's part of what we mean. There are lots of other details and lots of other cases and regulatory entities that have similar effects on our society. We should critically analyze all of the information that we take into our minds. So don't just kind of believe me or anyone else for that matter, but look into this source material for yourself. I'm also going to link a report that's a little bit more in depth by an awesome documentary filmmaker and lawyer who now does financial analysis. And his channel, Best Evidence, is a great resource that you should go into. It's probably a little bit cleaner, a little bit more professional than what I've done here, but we're just starting out. Okay, so be patient, if you can, or don't, I guess. Let me end by reading a quote from Oscar Wilde. It is a little bit harsh, but true, I think. Most people are other people. Their thoughts are someone else's opinions. Their lives, a mimicry. Their passions, a quotation. This is the undiscovered country. Until next time. Goodbye.